Hello there, this is Lynn Reilly, author, licensed professional counselor, master energy therapist, and your host of Living Serendipitously. Today I'm going to be talking about a simple way to change the habit you say you want to change, but don't feel like you know where to start. It sounds good, right? Who doesn't have those habits that you really would like to change, but you don't know the first step or even how to identify where to start? So I'm going to give you some simple advice on changing it up and figuring it out that you can use in any situation in your life that's asking for change. For more of these types of practices and concepts, check out my working book, 30 Days to Me. You can find it, as well as my children's book, The Secret to Beating the Dragon, on my website, livingwithserendipity.com and sacredstoriesmedia.com, as well as from booksellers worldwide. So a few years ago, after I quit my job and I started moving in an entirely new direction in my life, I was facing some pretty big fears. But I began to notice that it was the seemingly smaller ones that got in the way just as much as, if not more, than the big ones. I was holding myself back on many things and I kept feeling stuck. And I was in this process of recreating my life, and I didn't want it to look like it always had, so I knew I had to make different decisions, but I wasn't sure what they were. So I am a very big Seinfeld fan, and while I was thinking about my own stuckness, I remembered an episode where George, who always seemed to be finding himself with bad luck, decided to start doing the opposite of what he would normally do. He was sitting in the coffee shop complaining, and it was pointed out to him that if his life was going badly, that meant that his instincts were wrong. So in order to change his life, he had to do the opposite of what he would normally do. The complete opposite. Now, I'm not saying that your instincts are wrong, and I'm not saying mine are either. It's definitely a dramatic representation of, hey man, if it's not working, change it up. And so George decides to do this. He starts to do the opposite. And then suddenly his life started going really well and he was getting everything he wanted. He's sitting at the coffee shop. He orders the opposite lunch of what he would normally order. And he meets a beautiful woman who orders the same, and then she agrees to date him when he gives her the honest rundown of who he is. Then he has a job interview, and he tells the owner exactly what he's thinking, and it wasn't particularly complimentary, and then he gets a cushy job. He lives his life doing the opposite and is in awe of how well it turns out. I thought, you know what? There's probably something to that. So the summer I quit my job, I thought I would see just how well this theory worked and decided to have the summer of Lynn. When I was scared to do something, I would push through the resistance and do it anyway. If what I was doing was comfortable but kept giving me the same results, I chose to do the opposite. And I'm going to be honest, it was incredibly uncomfortable. Incredibly. But I started to see the results and that things were working out well for me. When I started my 30 Days to Me process, I practiced this technique even more. I went into those 30 days feeling depleted, and I was definitely overgiving to others. So I began to start giving to me first to fill myself back up so I would have something to give. Instead of saying yes to everything that anyone asked of me, I would check in with my own energy to see if I had something to give. And if I didn't, I would say no, which was against my typical practice. In turn, saying yes to me. Instead of ordering what I knew that I liked on a menu, I would order something new to try, because how else would I know what else I liked? I didn't have a lot of money at the time, and it felt like I didn't have enough money to spend on myself. I would do it anyway, and I wanted to see how it would turn out. And I felt the guilt afterwards, each time. But it also gave me an opportunity to practice letting it go by reminding myself that I deserve things I want too. And sure enough, I was never at a loss of having money for whatever it was I needed. Another big one for me was when I didn't feel like I had enough time to do something fun for myself, because I had so many other responsible things to do, had to be responsible. No time for fun, and I was so cranky around it, I decided, okay, I'm doing it anyway. And what I discovered was that everything that actually needed to get done always did. And that also meant recognizing that I could let go of a lot of other unnecessary stuff that I was holding on to as well. All I did was practice doing the opposite of my norm, and my life started changing in ways that felt really good. And it's really basic when you look at it. When you don't like where you are or what you're doing, the only way to change it is to change what you are doing. If you are doing the same thing over and over again with the same result, it's time. When you change the energy has to change. I'm going to repeat that because it's very important to remember. When you change the energy has to change. It's honestly just that simple. But if you're looking at what to change, I'm suggesting go with the opposite of what you normally would do and see what happens. Now, this does not mean that the opposite is always going to work great the first time around. It may need to be adjusted too, because sometimes the opposite is a bit extreme, and whatever it is that's asking to be changed just needs to be tweaked. It doesn't need to be a complete overhaul. But if you're looking for a place to start with the opposite, because then you can get a good sense where to go. I love this technique. Not only do I use it all the time for myself, I give it to my clients when they are stuck and seeing themselves unable to break a pattern. Because that's what we're really talking about here. Breaking patterns that we know don't work for us and try something new. And let's be real, breaking patterns and addictions to these patterns is not easy. This is why we need help and lots of practice to keep going. And it's rarely a one-shot deal to change a habit or a pattern that we thought at one point was working for us. And sometimes our habits are actually really tricky to identify too, especially when it comes to communicating with others, because there are so many underlying emotions that go into them. In fact, in my work with other people, I see dysfunctional communication patterns as one of the biggest causes of unhappiness and general dissatisfaction. So for example, if you are a typical people pleaser, you'll notice that you avoid anything that feels like conflict, even if it's not really conflict, but just a differing viewpoint. And one thing I see really often, as well as through my own personal experience, is the habit of holding back how you really feel. More times than not, this turns into holding onto resentment and then letting it build up, and then having it come out in aggressive ways or passive-aggressive ways, both in a way that hurts the other person the way you are hurt. So if someone does something that bothers you, but you don't tell them because you don't want to rock the boat, then they do it again and again, that's going to turn into some seriously annoying resentment inside you. And if this is your tendency, it'll be helpful for you to note that the perceived conflict that you think you are avoiding by not sharing your actual feelings turns into inner conflict and festers, and eventually it becomes outer conflict that is 10 times stronger than the one that you thought you were avoiding. Which is really, this is just a clear example of manifesting your fears through avoidance and getting exactly what you fear. So in this scenario, the opposite would be to be direct and tell the truth if something is bothering you. But let's take it a step further and not just complain, but add a solution to it. Like, hey, it upsets me when you do this or say this. But if you said this or did this instead, I think it would benefit both of us. Something like that. Relationships are such a big one, and the stressor and poor habits of communication are typically the top complaints from people that I hear. What is it that are your communication habits that are not working for you and could use some addressing? When you start taking responsibility for the crummy habits you've developed, it's extremely empowering because you have the power to change them. And that is freaking awesome. So, let's say you're a complainer. Just the opposite. Stop complaining and start offering solutions. If you are the martyr, stop blaming someone else and being the victim and start asking for what you want. And to really shake it up, what if you try changing your behavior, not trying to manipulate theirs through guilt and shaming? If you are the strong and responsible one, stop taking on all the responsibility to fix everything and let someone else give to you. Practice learning how to receive. If you clam up and don't share how you feel, start by telling one person you trust how you feel and your feelings about how you feel the way you feel. Let it go. Let it out. If you're in the habit of giving yourself away to everyone else, stop giving that precious energy away. Start saying yes to you first and not others. Once you've filled yourself up, then say yes to what is outside of you. Do the opposite of what you normally do and see what happens next. I have no doubt you will be delightfully surprised. You can learn more of these simple techniques and practices in my working book, 30 Days to Me, which can be found on my website, livingwithserendipity.com, as well as sacredstoriesmedia.com and booksellers worldwide. You know it's time to change up those habits you keep talking about, so go ahead, do the opposite, and see what magic comes next. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I will catch you next time on Living Serendipitously with Lynn Reilly.